Today on BRS TV Refacts, we answer, what's the easiest way to set up a calcium reactor? Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRS TV Refacts. Today we're setting up a calcium reactor the easy way. Easiest is a bit of a loaded question because everyone will have an opinion on that. This is just our opinion, and to us the easiest means the average reefer can do it with reliable, readily available equipment. I'll note this isn't the cheapest way to set up a reactor. That's an entire other FAQ that I'm sure we'll do as well. For those of you who don't know, the calcium reactor is just using carbon dioxide to melt old coral skeleton into calcium and alkalinity into the tank. Presumably at the same ratio that the new coral skeleton will use it as well. There are absolutely other benefits like dosing other elements bound up in the old coral skeleton, most notably strontium. This video does assume that you know the basics of how a reactor works. If you don't, we have some in-depth videos on the concept and even some step-by-step how-tos with some of the reactors out there. Calcium reactors are often presented as these complex devices that require all sorts of tuning, but in reality that's nonsense. All you need to do is set it up to dose a consistent strength of solution of calcium and alkalinity, and then adjust how much you dose each day. This is how you do those two simple things. So step one is getting a stable concentration of calcium and alkalinity, meaning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The potency of the solution and amount of dissolved calcium and alkalinity inside the reactor is stable and the same, which inherently also means what's dosed to the tank is the same strength 24/7 as well. Turns out maintaining a stable strength solution is easy. A stable pH in the reactor creates a stable strength solution. This may vary a bit with media types and reactor designs or size, but Randy did an Investigates where he clearly demonstrated with the Vertex reactor and Two Little Fish's Reborn media that there was a stable concentration at each pH point. Meaning in those examples, if we set our reactor's pH controller to a pH of 6.4, the solution inside the reactor should have an alkalinity of around 40 DKH. At 6.5, it drops to 35. At 6.6, it drops to a DKH of 29, 6.7, 25, and 6.8, 22 DKH. That pretty much covers the entire range that most reefers would keep it in, and you can see the amount of calcium alkalinity in the solution clearly has a very close relationship with the pH inside the reactor. Part of making it easy is just giving clear direction as to which of those pHs to pick. And for the sake of clarity, I'm just going to say that most reefers should peg the pH at 6.5, which will produce a pretty concentrated solution. The reason we recommend a more concentrated solution is because you can dose nearly half as much. Biggest benefit to dosing half as much solution is it'll make the dosing pump tubing last twice as long, pump motor roughly twice as long, and when it spins slower, it's also a lot quieter. We also have a refact plan to show how dosing half as much of the lower pH 6.5 solution actually results in a higher pH in the reef tank than dosing twice as much of a higher pH solution like 6.8, which I think a lot of calcium reactor users will find interesting. Okay, so how do you peg the pH of 6.5 in the reactor? That's as simple as using a pH controller to open and close an electronic solenoid on your regulator using an aquarium controller or pH controller. Many reefers will use this as a good excuse to pick up a full controller like the Apex. The full Apex has 2 B and C ports. You can monitor the pH of the reactor and the tank at the same time if you pick up an extra probe. The Apex EL has 1 B and C and would work well just in the reactor, but you can also upgrade a module for the tank at a later date. However, you can also get a standalone controller like the Milwaukee pH controller, which is currently only about 130 bucks. I'll say for those of you that are not technology junkies, setting the pH on a simple standalone controller like this is as simple as turning a knob, not as precise, but the ease of use will be attractive to many. In either case, set the controller to maintain a pH of 6.5 in the reactor, and you now have a stable concentration of calcium and alkalinity in the reactor. As a precaution, it's then wise to tune your regulator to a bubble rate that matches that goal as well. Basically, just tune the needle valve on a manual option like the Tunge regulator and solenoid kit, or the knob on the carbon doser until the solenoid is open most of the time. Doing that step will provide some backup redundancy in case the controller or probe were to ever fail. Okay, step 2 is just adjust how much of that stable concentration you dose to the tank. Meaning I dose 10 milliliters a minute and the levels are dropping. Turn the flow up to 15 milliliters a minute and so on until you find the right dose. Not much different than any of the 2-parts many of us have used at one point. In fact, just like 2-part, they're easy to use calculators like JD's Calcium Reactor Setup Help, where you enter a few fields and it tells you the exact flow rate to use. The Calcium Reactor Calculator is an awesome tool for any reactor user. One note here, at one point, the reefing community commonly believed that tuning up the flow rate of the reactor would decrease contact time in the reactor, and because of that, decrease the concentration of calcium and alkalinity in the reactor, and that was part of the complex equation. Turns out, while that's kind of true, it's just not something that most reefers should spend a lot of time thinking about. Randy did a BRS TV Investigates on the topic and found that even after cranking up the flow from 5 milliliters to a minute to 100 or 20 times the flow rate, the potency only dropped like 15%. Rather than get lost in all that science, it's just easier to test and dose a bit more if needed. To control the flow rate, there are two options. First is some kind of needle valve to adjust the flow rate. However, I would not call this the easiest option because they have a tendency to get partially or completely clogged over time. The biggest change in the calcium reactor world in the last decade has absolutely been the entrance of the FX STP continuous duty dosing pump from Chemour. Continuous duty being the key word here. All the other dosing pumps in the reefing hobby are rated to only be on to minutes to hours a day. With the Chemour pump, not only is it continuous duty, meaning it can be run 24/7, but adjusting the flow rate on the reactor is simple as turning a knob. More calcium and alkalinity, turn it up. Less, turn it down. It's also accurate, calibratable, and important components like the pump head and tubing are replaceable. You can certainly start with an inexpensive needle valve for adjusting flow, but I think a vast majority of reefers will gravitate to the Chemour FX STP as budget allows. A continuous duty dosing pump is just a game changer for calcium reactors. That, and I think the existence of these calcium reactor calculators. Once you know that they exist and try one out, it's really about as easy as tuning your 2-part dose, arguably easier in some ways. We did a video on using the calculator to tune your reactor, so you can check that out right here. While the calculator's been around for a while, it's worth checking out double so if you're interested in the concept of pegging the pH and a continuous duty dosing pump. Thanks for watching. See you all next Wednesday with the next release of BRS TV Reef Facts.